Well, Abby, thank you so much for being on this show. We obviously are huge fans of your social media. You talk a lot about like women empowerment, and that's something that we really are trying to create as a culture here in our podcast. But one of the things that we really hone in is self-care through hobbies. So we love to bring on interesting guests and pick their brain about their hobbies and how they got into it and how they use that as tools to continue to improve on self-care. So can you
Yeah,
tell us a little bit
absolutely.
about yourself and your hobbies?
Yeah, so gosh, hobbies are so hard as a mom, you know.
Absolutely. We can
I
relate.
feel there's, not enough hours in the day,
No.
like for the things that I have to get through, let alone the things that like, oh, I would just like to
Right.
do.
Yes.
But when I think after my second was born in 2017, I was working at an agency with my friend in social media, and I worked in social media for God, 13 years now,
Okay,
well,
Wow.
14 years, so forever.
Holy cow.
But
Yeah.
I was like working with my friend and I were working with influencers, so we were like we were managing influencer marketing
gotcha.
for a couple of our pretty big brands. And one, we were seeing like how much we were paying these these influencers.
Wow.
And in like 2017, this was like peak
Yes.
influencer,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
the photos and like so we understood like what was going into it, but I was like I just become like a mom for the second time and I felt like I had so much knowledge that I just wanted to share that nobody shared with me. And I was like, I told my husband, I was like, I hated the term influencer because I didn't
Yeah.
feel like
Sure.
that was what I was trying to do. I was like, I'm gonna start a blog. And he was like, okay, okay. I was like, I'm gonna be serious about it. So this is gonna be, it's gonna take up some time, but I'm committed to it. And
Good
he
for
was like,
you.
yeah, 100%. I'm gonna support you. And it took me a while to find my footing, in the blog sense. I was more of like I don't want to try to sell you like clothes and stuff. Like that's
Sure.
not that I don't shop enough for that. I like thrift
Yeah.
shops, so I couldn't really do like the like to know it and get a kickback on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wrote about like what I learned in motherhood, like my birth experiences and things like that. And then I think like a lot of people in 2020 and the lockdown happened, I got on TikTok for a couple reasons. A lot of my clients were at the time like, "Hey, do we need to be on this?" And I was like, honestly, as a social media person, I should probably know this. So I got on just to get my feet wet, better understand like what is this? Like
Mhm.
what,
Yeah.
Yeah.
am I too old for this? Am I too old to be here?
Feels like it for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I was more of a watcher and a lurker for a while. And then I was like, this feels natural. Like I just got on and was
Hmm.
like yapping
Yep.
and
Amazing.
and people were
Yeah.
like, wow, like people really like perked their ears up and they were like, this is
Resonated with them.
interesting and listening. And I was like, and from there it's just kind of grown on its own. And that's probably now it's a hobby, but it also brings in a little bit of income, which is
Yeah.
nice. It's not something I rely on fully, but it's definitely something I found a lot of fulfillment in as I've grown as a person, as a mom, as a
Mhm.
woman, as a wife. So yeah, I mean, probably that's my main, I guess you'd call it a hobby. I'd call it a
Yeah,
hobby.
you
I don't
can definitely call it
know.
a hobby. Yeah, I mean, it probably takes up quite a bit of your extra time. So,
Mhm.
It
yeah, there's
does.
a lot of extra time for other things when when you're
Yeah.
a busy woman and wife and mom and doing that. So,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
yeah.
And it sounds like it brings you joy. I mean,
Mhm.
I follow you. So like just hearing like the way you communicate to your audience, you seem like you're committed, you believe in your messages and you enjoy being that female empowerment
Yeah.
that you put out there. So I feel like check, hobby.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Yes.
And it sounds like you have a very supportive husband, which helps you to do this hobby, this probably all-encompassing hobby. We talk a
Hmm.
lot about, so one thing I wanted to touch on with you in one of our episodes, we talked about the gender hobby gap and how
Oh.
traditionally, m- hobbies take men out of the home, whereas women tend to stay in the home more for their hobbies.
Hmm.
And so we've touched on that some in our own personal
Yeah.
lives and how we feel like our husbands have lots of hobbies, they dabble in lots of things and we just have never really had that because we are the nurturers, the caregivers. And I guess just do you have any thoughts on that? You feel like that's true?
Pause.
I have lots of
I'm
thoughts
sure
on
you have
this.
lots to say about
All right, I'm ready for the yap.
Give
Go.
it to us.
It's so interesting because like I know that this exists. My
Yeah,
husband is not that person. He's
yeah,
very introverted. I am an outgoing. like extroverted person. And just given his schedule, honestly, our schedule, like my hobby does, it is an in the home hobby.
Yeah.
I'm not out and about, kind
Yeah.
of thing. But if I did want that, I know that that's something that I would go and do, and
Mhm.
it would be like, we're going to figure it out because this is something I want to fulfill. But yeah, the gender hobby gap is real, and I've been there. I have friends whose husbands are hunters or golfers and or marathon trainers, and so much of that, God, I don't even know where to begin with like addressing
Yeah,
that because it goes that's such a topical issue.
for sure.
What's below that
For
is
sure.
so much more of those societal gender norms.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times women feeling like they can't do that because one, we don't have the time.
Mhm.
Our husbands' hobbies take up a lot of time. And so how do we kind of assert ourselves into no, I
Mhm.
have to fulfill myself in
Yes.
order for me to keep fulfilling my job as a mom, as a wife, as a friend, a daughter, employee, whatever it might be. So yeah, God, it's so hard, but I personally always advocate for women to find fulfillment outside of motherhood.
Yeah.
I think we've all been in the position where, you feel like you're coming out of the fog on the other side, a year or two after you have a kid and
Yeah.
kind of finding
Great way to
yourself.
describe it. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I am a person. Like, I am still in here. Like, it's
Yes.
me,
Yes. Yes.
Jessica. You
Yeah.
know,
Definitely.
like I'm
Definitely.
in there.
Yeah.
I have to
And that
find
takes
her
years
again.
to get to that point again
It
after having
does.
It
kids.
does.
Long time.
It
Yeah.
really does.
Mhm.
And remember, like, oh, I have things that I like that are
Yeah.
just, for me. And God, that's so hard because you become so entrenched and engulfed in everything motherhood, and then your kids go to school, and you've got, back to school stuff, and you've got
Mhm.
sports, and you've got, whatever else it might be, and you just find yourself kind of at the wayside of fulfilling everybody else's needs and
Yeah.
doing things for everybody else. But I think it's so, so important, one, for women to have an income of their
Yes.
own and for women to have a hobby that fulfills them outside of motherhood and wifely duties. But I also understand how difficult that is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. And I know that you kind of mentioned this before where you said that women aren't wired differently, they're conditioned differently. And I
Oh,
think that
100%.
plays into that hobby gap. Would
Hmm.
you agree?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've there's been studies like women's brains and men's brains really aren't that different. You look back in time prehistorically, women weren't just gatherers, we were hunters. Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
the research and the data is there, and it's this common misconception that women are natural nurturers. No, women don't have any choice but to be natural nurturers. When a baby comes, the dad takes a step back, and it's just like
Mhm.
we throw mom into it, and we're like, figure it out, mom. And
Mhm.
dads are like, oh, dad, go along for the ride. Let mom, kind of teach you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's so tiring for
Yeah.
moms. It's so exhausting. It's wildly unfair. And it sets women up for a lot of failures and a lot of
Yeah.
resentment, a lot of burnout.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, we're not wired that differently. We're conditioned
Yeah.
very, very differently though. And I think about it, what was I telling? I think I might have been telling a friend, but I was thinking the other day, I need a babysitter.
Mhm.
And my first thought is, all right, what girls in the
Yep.
neighborhood are teenagers? And then
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second,
Yeah.
why don't I ever
A
think
perfect example.
of
Excellent
a
Yeah.
boy in
example.
high school? I think of a boy to come mow my lawn or pull my weeds or move
So
some
true.
furniture for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, that even runs deep inside me,
Yeah.
and
That is a great,
so,
great
so
example.
much
Yes.
unlearning.
Yes.
But I think what you point out is something that I really hope resonates with our listeners is the fact that like you're self-aware, right? You're self-aware that you also are part of that like conditioning, but you're recognizing it and trying to change that, right? And I think that
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with you awakening to the fact that you're part of that conditioning,
Yeah.
right?
No,
Yeah.
What
it's a
use
good
that
thing.
to be like a stepping stone to
Hmm.
make that change and
Hmm.
be that change, right? Because like you talk
Hmm.
about like how your partner is like you guys are truly partners, right? Like you're not asking him permission to go and do a hobby or asking him to help you clean. Like he helps
Hmm.
because he's your partner. And I would say
Hmm.
Yeah.
Aaron and I are
Yeah.
both also very fortunate that we
Hmm.
have partners that are like that as
Hmm.
well. And actually, anecdotally, my husband used to be a babysitter.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
right? So it's, I think like having partners that you can kind of like work together on breaking that stereotype, I think is very helpful. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of a step that our listeners can do to kind of make that step of involvement once they recognize they're part of that conditioning is start having that conversation with their partner, start at home, start working
Yeah.
there. And I think as you do that, your kids are going to observe it. And then that circle just spreads out more, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for one thing, like a lot of women come to me and say, where do I start with this conversation? And one, I hate that it's on the woman to have to do this,
Yeah,
but
Right,
that,
right.
it's an
but they're the
unfortunate
ones suffering,
truth.
right?
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think men will tolerate some level of permanent unhappiness as tolerable, and women won't do that anymore. But I think, the one thing I always tell people, your very first hurdle is your husband. If you don't have a husband who is willing to listen, who is open to hearing about your needs and allowing you safety and bringing those concerns and wants and needs and validation to him, that's your barrier. You're not going to get any further
Yeah.
than that. And once you're husband and wife, that's an unfortunate thing. You're kind of locked in there unless you can get some therapy for individual or couples counseling. But it starts even before, I
Yeah.
tell women before you're married, these are the things, these are the conversations you need to be having, these are the things you need to be looking for. And even that's not, foolproof.
Yeah.
But it is something
Advice,
that,
though.
you gotta think about.
No, it's so true. I mean, for us to even have like our husbands have been supportive to allow us this ability to podcast for a few hours every month and then do all this other extra things. And now we're trying new hobbies as part of this process. And that's only because we have supportive husbands and, they have their hobbies, we have ours now. And, we're truly finding that creating that self-care time allows us to better take care of our families, like you said, and be better women in all aspects of our lives. And it's just been really positive for us just in so many ways. Yeah.
Well, I think because like to the overall tone of it is it can't just be all on the woman to find that time to get that self-care. Because like you pointed out, like if your husband is somebody who has like those really long extending hobbies like golf and hunting, like they're out for hours, and it's hard to find within your already busy schedule time where you as a mom could plug yourself into that pipeline of that self-care time. So like you have
if you're working Monday through Friday and then they're gone all day Saturday, where's your time for
right? So like if you have that conversation, maybe your husband just isn't aware, right? Like just plug it into their brain, like get them just to start seeing that and then having that conversation and work together to get there, right? I think you would agree that's probably a good step.
Yeah.
I think another thing that you mentioned in your account that I thought was really interesting is I see that you get a lot of comments about how it's selfish of women to want this kind of time. And I really don't like that word.
We don't.
At all, because I don't think it's selfish to want something that our partners are warranted without question. And so within our podcast, we've tried to keep the word selfish, but then like change the positivity of it by calling it positive selfish.
Yeah.
How do you feel that using the word selfish plays in describing hobbies and self-care time?
I think we have given the term selfish for women. I think the patriarchy and men really like to use that manipulatory like way to make us feel bad. And just like I get called a bitter, angry woman all the time, I am bitter. There's nothing wrong with being bitter if you were a woman and you understood what we go through day in and day out, and we have gone through for centuries. I think you'd be bitter too. So I kind of, I own that word. I am bitter. You're a yapper. I am a yapper. Like I'm going to take that. You're not going to use that against me. If I don't allow you to use that negatively towards me, it loses its power. I advocate for women to be selfish. It's okay to be selfish. You need, I don't know why society feels like mom's world has to change, all the time. We hear, oh, it's great that dad's going back to work, but then we call women selfish when they want to go back and continue to accelerate in their careers and their professional advancements. So we have to get rid of that double standard. And a lot of that comes when women take that power back and we own that word, like, and it's okay. And we normalize it among other women, because sometimes as women, we can be kind of our biggest competitors and our biggest downfall. And if we all get on the same page of, yes, it's okay for us to be that way, then I I think it kind of loses the power that people hold against it.
Yeah,
I agree.
definitely.
I think you're right. Like taking that, and I don't think we even realized that we were doing that when we initially created
Yeah.
positive selfish by owning that word. And I think there's a lot of empowerment in that,
Mhm.
which is great that we pulled you in because I mean that's just your thing, that's your specialty, right?
True.
That, but I mean, you're right. It's taking that word and making it our own and
Mhm.
putting that positive,
Yeah.
or the pun spin on it.
Yeah.
I think
I mean,
helps
we can
us
both
own that.
relate to that. We were both in a place in our lives with our careers. We had pretty much expended all of our energy. I mean, nothing left to give to ourselves. And, you know, this is part of our process of taking that time back. So
Mhm.
we can
Mhm.
100% relate to that.
Absolutely.
Do you have any ideas of, have you considered like starting hobbies outside of your social media? I know you said you don't really feel like you have the time. Is there anything that interests you other than what
Oh
you're
God.
currently doing?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start volunteering at the women's domestic violence shelter,
Yeah.
Friends of Yates. I don't know if you've seen the show Made on Netflix, but I
Yes.
watched it
Yeah. Yeah.
recently,
Mhm.
and it was pretty life altering for me.
Mhm.
Just get like
Really?
given the
Wow.
things that I'm already passionate about and the things that I already talk about, but I was like, you know what, I have to. I think that this is something that's really important for me, and doing any sort of mental health or women's advocacy is something that I'm just naturally drawn toward and
Yeah.
passionate about, and I think I can help with that. And my friend and I have actually started, we call it a podcast, but we're not on like we're not streaming on podcasts. We called it like a YouTube content series. So we started that as well as it's kind of like an arm of what I
Okay.
do already.
Yeah.
But
Great.
yeah, definitely volunteering.
Where do you foresee your, social media going? Do you have any plans for the future with,
I don't. I
no.
am just
I mean, you're
along for the
surviving
ride.
right
Like
now. Yeah.
a lot of times, yeah, I feel like I'm
Yeah.
surviving.
Yeah. Totally.
I don't have any like when I'm just not a planner by nature. I'm more of
Yeah.
just like fly by the seat of my
Yeah.
pants, and I
Truly.
just kind of see where where it goes. I don't want it to start feeling like it's not a hobby. Like it's something I have to do,
Yes. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
still something for 4 years now that it's been something I enjoy and I get to do.
Yeah.
So I try to keep it that way and kind of keep my lens on it in that way.
Yeah. That's so cool. You found something that you are that passionate about and brings you some joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really cool.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, is there any type of message that you would really like to share with our audience that would really give them just like the to just like go out there and take that time for themselves to prioritize self-care?
I think just that you deserve it and you're allowed to be something other than a mom and a wife, and you were somebody before that, and we shouldn't have to completely let that go and forget that person. We are allowed to be people and have roles outside of being a mom and being a wife, and don't let anybody convince you, society or otherwise, that you're selfish for wanting more
Mhm.
out of your life. I think we can really get into the nitty gritty of believing that message because we've heard it from all angles since we were
Mhm.
young girls, that your main goal in life is to get married and have kids and
Mhm.
find a good man. And if that doesn't look like it for you, if you're not married yet, think about that.
Yeah.
Consider it. There's so many options out there. And if you are, start putting yourself first, because I think when women do that, their entire family will ultimately benefit.
I
It might
agree.
not seem like that in the beginning. You're going to feel like it's a little bit selfish, but again, we're back to that. Own that selfishness. It's
Mhm.
okay to
Mhm.
be selfish.
Mhm.
Everybody and your children will benefit because of your selfishness.
I
I,
love that.
I
That is well
agree.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very well said.
Yeah.
And I agree with that because I feel like I even recognize it in my own home. Like
Yes.
me, like taking that time for myself, I can feel like there's like a shift in the
Definitely.
energy
Yeah.
within my own home.
Absolutely.
Absolutely
I
agree with
agree.
that.
Yeah.
I feel it. Really,
Me
I felt like you were talking
too.
directly to
Yes.
me. Like I felt like
Yes.
seen by that message. Just keep talking to me.
No, we love your message and what you're all about. So thank you
Yes.
for sharing with us. Is there anything you'd like to promote? Any links you want us to add or
You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Abby Eckel. And yeah, that's about it.
okay,
Wonderful. I
awesome.
love it. I
Thank
so
you.
appreciate you
Yeah.
being on the show with us today. You were a delight to talk to, honestly.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed
Of
it.
course. Thanks,
Thank you.
Abby.